Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 180 of the Arc Junkies Podcast. I hope you all had a great and safe Independence Day. I had some family over yesterday, smoked a few chickens, and made a badass smoked queso. We also celebrated my son's 12th birthday. He was born on the 4th of July. How cool is that? We also lit off some fireworks in the evening to top it all off. All in all, it was a great relaxing weekend. In this week's episode, I'm talking with Jake Ross from Hypertherm about plasma cutting, both mechanized and handheld. He also has a great free trial for listeners of the show, so keep your ears peeled for the details on that. Before we get into it, a quick word from the supporters of the show. Today's episode of the Arc Junkies Podcast is brought to you by Everlast Welders. Whether you're new to welding or you're a seasoned pro looking to get into business for yourself and you need a machine to get set up and going on your side work, Everlast has you covered. Whether it's a stick-TIG combo like the 255 EXT so you can practice at home while going to school or learn the trade, or one of the bigger multi-process machines like the MTS 275 to use for more industrial projects. Or maybe you need a Cyclone 200E for all the quick MIG welding jobs that pop up. Everlast has a machine for every skill level and every budget. Everlast is backed by a 5-year warranty, and they even offer financing on select models with approved financing. So what are you waiting for? Check out everlastwelders.com today and use Arc Junkies in the comment section at checkout to get a free Nova foot pedal and TIG torch when you buy any machine that comes with a stock foot pedal. That's everlastwelders.com. And don't forget to give them a follow on Instagram and check out all the great welding tutorials they have over on their YouTube channel at Everlast Welders. Well, it's a new month, and you know what that means. Okay, maybe you don't, so let me fill you in. Right now, for the month of July, Fronius USA has another great offer for listeners of the Arc Junkies Podcast. Right now, when you buy any Transpocket 180, you get a free welding jacket and a pair of gloves. The Transpocket 180 is a wireless DC TIG and stick machine. Yes, I said wireless. And oh yeah, by the way, it'll run your 6010 rods as well. This machine is completely portable and only weighs 19.6 pounds. If you can get the machine to the part, you can weld it. No need to worry about an outlet or extension cord. The Transpocket 180 is powerful enough to run a 5/32 welding rod. It also comes with a hard side case with wheels to store your machine and your accessories. How convenient is it to just be able to carry your machine right to the work and start welding without having to locate an outlet, run a bunch of extension cords before you start welding? Now, you have the ability to weld remotely. At the hunting camp, out on the trail, in the man lift, out in the field, the sky's the limit with this machine. All you have to do to take advantage of this great deal is head on over to shopweldingsupplies.com/ArcJunkies and put the machine, gloves, and jacket in your cart and use Arc Junkies in the discount box at checkout. The jacket and gloves are yours for free. Take advantage of this great deal now through the end of the month. We're also brought to you by Rockmount Research and Alloys, who make the best maintenance welding electrodes on the market, in my opinion. What exactly is maintenance welding? Well, I'm glad you asked. Maintenance welding covers everything from weld repairs on heavy equipment to hard facing. Welding on equipment in manufacturing and processing facilities for concrete plants to widget factories. Rockmount picks up where traditional welding rods leave off. Other electrodes are made to work under the initial fabrication where the material and the environment are controlled. But once the part's in service, they get covered in rust, paint, grease, oil, and other hydrocarbons. Your traditional stick, MIG, and TIG wires are useless in those environments. That's why there's Rockmount. They make a rod or wire for every situation, and they're my go-to for dissimilar and unidentifiable steel alloys. One of the coolest things I notice about these rods is that they weld at a much lower amperage, but have better penetration, higher tensile strength, and greater elongation than traditional electrodes. Find out more today at rockmountwelding.com and get the job done right the first time, every time with Rockmount. Tell them the Arc Junkie sent you. And one more thing, don't forget to tune in this week to an all-new episode of Weld Wednesday with AWS. This time I'm sitting down and chatting with Peter Portella, who helps develop codes and standards through the American Welding Society. It's a great episode. All right, you know what time it is. Fire up your machine, drop your hood, and turn me up 5.
You're listening to the Arc Junkies Podcast. Helping you make every weld better than your last with each episode. And now your host, Jason Becker.
All right, Jake, it was great meeting you up there at the Welding Educator Workshop. I think it was like 2 weeks ago, hanging out with Ryan Eubank. We've chatted a couple times on Instagram, but I finally got to meet you in person. I've been wanting you to get on the show for a while because when we talk about welding, you can't really talk about welding without, thermal cutting processes. And one of the coolest thermal cutting processes that, that I prefer, especially in a shop environment, is plasma cutting. So I want to get a little bit about your history. How did you end up working over at Hypertherm? How did you end up, getting into plasma cutting?
Yeah, well, first off, Jason, thanks for inviting me on. It's really exciting, and I'm excited to be kind of an ambassador for talking a little bit about plasma cutting today and some of the unique things that plasma has done over the years. But if we look kind of at a background, post high school, my background was military related. So right out of high school, I joined the Navy, and I was an avionics technician. So I was a second class petty officer, and when I got out, it was just kind of the right situation for my family at the time to get out and relocate back home. So I was stationed in the Pacific Northwest, and my wife and I, we relocated back to Michigan, and I ended up getting picked up by a company called Fronius. And what was really nice about kind of the backdoor way that I made it in is I made it back. I made it into the industry kind of through a back door, and leveraging kind of my electronics background in the technical side of things. And the thing that really drew me to the industry, it's kind of like the bug zappers, the old bug zappers. And, you got this bright light and you see the bug attached, just has to go to it. And that was my experience with seeing a welding arc for the first time and seeing a robotic welding system. And in the interview situation, I was like, hey, if I come onto this company, will I learn welding? Will I learn robotics? And they're like, you can learn anything you want to, as long as you put the time in. And I quickly wanted to do that. So I was a system engineer. I worked on specifically the robotics side for a while, and, an opportunity came up to transition my career towards sales. And I moved down to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I covered 4 states for sales. So Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, and Kentucky. And, after a while, I was looking for a new challenge, and I was trying to get a little closer to home, and an opportunity to come on board to Hypertherm popped up, and I jumped on it right after I had actually just bought a Hypertherm plasma cutter. So it was a really cool experience where, not only am I a user of the product, but now I get to go and represent that brand.
So it was like perfect timing, because you're actually using the products, you can get more proficient with it and learn some of the stuff about it from like an end user standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's funny about it is I was really kind of setting up my garage to get ready to do some CNC cutting. And at the time, of course, I had an unlimited access to welding equipment. So my head wasn't exactly in the space of let's buy welding equipment. It was, hey, what can I do to, expand my capabilities and learn a new skill? And that's really the trend. The trend in my career is, what can I put in my toolbox to be more successful, and what more can I learn? We were just at the educator workshop, Jason, and I'll tell you what, these guys at the educator workshop, they were there to learn. They were there to pick up new skills. You think you're top dog and you're a welding educator and you have these students under you. I was so impressed during the showmanship there. I mean, Ryan's on the floor with soapstone, drawing things out, showing people how to fit things. And he's really pushing, the educators to the next level. It's, you become a student and you want to transfer as much skill set to others. And, I really look at some of the topics that got put out there, Kyle Linko was talking about being a life coach, and that really spoke to me. And some of the exercises that we went through, I mean, I can tell you right off the bat, I came home and I did some of these exercises with my son. It was impressive.
Ryan's got a way with like teaching. It comes very natural. And I've said it to a lot of people that he can take like a group of 6-year-olds and have them TIG welding like proficiently within an hour. Like I'm talking like lap joints, T-joints. He's just got a way to make things, very simplified to where everybody can understand it. And that's kind of what I try to do with all my processes. Like, and I've learned a lot of different teaching strategies and methods from him to, make it more simple to talk to my students. It's very, like when we talk about admixture and electrode angle using a cup of chocolate milk or a cup of milk with chocolate. Now we're talking about admixture, we're talking about travel angle, work angle, and the effect amperage has on the puddle by using a straw in a cup of fluid,
Yeah, it's really impressive. And, you listen to Ryan talk, and, if you're listening from maybe the Arc Junkies podcast, you might be like, man, this guy, he talks really proud, but he is probably, one of the most humble people I've ever met. I mean, that educator workshop, people were there to learn, and he learned things. I mean, he was so humble about like, hey, you taught me something that I'm going to take to the classroom. And that's what's really exciting about, being in that position. From my stance, I'm doing outside sales, and, you may think it's all about hitting a number, and that's a portion of it. But, one of the best things that we can do for the industry as a whole in roles like mine and other outside sales rep is to really understand what's happening in education and what can we do to make things better. Mm-hmm. I immediately, after being at the educator workshop all last week, I talked to, large end users and manufacturing, executives. And, I asked them, how willing are you to partner with education? Let's talk about that. Are you talking with educators today? And it really got the hamster wheels turning, and, they're actually very open. They want to do that. And I expect to see a lot more people reaching out and talking to their local educators in the industry.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it couldn't have been a more perfect time, because I'm actually conducting interviews right now to get into my program. So we started this student interview process just to make sure the people that are coming in, they actually want to be there. And I was talking to two of the potential students for the night class, and they're like, yeah, I want to do nights because I want to work during the day, but I'm trying to find something that's in a welding related field. And typically that's kind of hard to do, but we have an employer that we work with. We supply them with, with good employees during their time at the school, to work at their shop during the day, gain some experience, and then they work at night and they kind of learn the technical aspects of it. And when they graduate, they can move on to a bigger shop or a different industry or something more welding focused. But this shop, they do quite a bit of welding, fabrication, and stuff like that. So I called down to the supervisor, and I was like, hey man, I got two new guys. They have a little bit of shop experience, not so much welding, but they're trainable. And, I'll give you my word that these are going to be two good people, because we just conducted the interview, and I've talked to them previously, but I was able to line them up with a job interview today. So I'm anticipating, that both of them are going to get hired at this employer prior to even starting the class. So employers are starting to come around to education more and more. And I think it's a great thing, because you see on a resume that everybody wants, you got to have 5 years work experience. You got to have this, you got to have that. And you got to have all your own tools and all these certifications and stuff. And we got a really competitive salary at $14 an hour. No, that's not competitive. That's like, you're not going to find a 5-year seasoned welder for that kind of money. But I can give you a student who's like kind of very similar to a work study that's going to come in there and work part-time hours, be able to take the program in the evening. So it's a win-win. They're filling their labor, and, the students are gaining on-site experience and stuff like that. And we've developed this relationship with this company. So anytime they need a welder or any of the other programs that we provide, we send them students, and they can't get enough of them. They love it. I just wish I could get more employers to say, this kid may not have 5 years work experience right now, but he's trainable. He doesn't have bad habits, and they're willing to learn, or she in this case. We place a lot of females as well, and give them that opportunity to enter the workforce and learn these skills and get proficient and learn how to do it, the way the company's doing it.
Well, I think what you're doing is awesome. Working with local companies and, trying to change the mindset, and that topic came out, obviously, what are you paying entry level? And, some of them were very point blank. Like, we want someone that's teachable. Mm-hmm. And, that's great from an education standpoint, that you're getting people that are teachable. And a lot of these companies are willing to, bump that pay bracket up a little bit, as long as someone is teachable and they're worth that. But some of the arguments, and they're valid, is, well, we're getting people that can pass a test, but, maybe they can't read a blueprint, or they didn't get some of these skills reinforced in the education environment, that they're actually not exactly turnkey right out of, school.
Right.
And I understand that argument as well. I absolutely do. That was one of the things, that really stood out during the workshop is, you can spend a couple hours in teaching people how to read, symbols and blueprints. But if you're not going to actually, enforce and, reinforce that during the education process, they're gonna lose it because they're not using it on a regular basis. So, talking real quick about education, and if you're driving, don't do this, but, if you close your eyes and you really think about the teachers you had in high school or even post-secondary, you're going to think of one teacher that stands out. That's just really someone that really had a positive impact on you. And, it stands out. And I can give you a great example. I mean, I'm down in Tennessee one day and my mom gives me a call and she's like, "Hey, do you know these 3 people?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I work with them." One was my manager. The other guy was a person that I really looked up to that, I wanted to, follow his career path to a certain extent. And the other guy taught me how to TIG weld. And, we find out that our family friend, taught at the Votech, and they all went there and they all led on to have awesome, successful careers. But it all came down to that educator. And I'll throw his name out there. His name's Jeff Grossman, out of the Eaton Rapids, Lansing area, that had a positive impact on these people's lives. And they wanted to stick in this industry and go grow their career. And that to me is what's really exciting, to have a positive impact. I mean, that's the real goal. I already quoted Kyle earlier, but, he talks about being a life coach. Mm-hmm. That's what it's about.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, you're not just teaching welding, you're teaching life skills, you're teaching work ethics, you're teaching drive and motivation. And I had this conversation with one of my other instructors the other day, you don't have to really say anything to change these students. All you have to do is set the example. I've had students, that had drug problems when they got in the program. They quit using drugs because they seen a means to the end. When it comes to welding, they're like, if I can get my crap together and, put this pipe down, I can pick that pipe up and weld it. And I can make a good career. I can make a good living. I could start, actually doing something with my life. I've had students change all kinds of, they started going to the gym and working out just because I was going to the gym. They see that. So, a lot of times they want to emulate you. So unbeknownst to you, you're teaching life skills, you're teaching work ethics just by setting the example. So you got to be like step one, be a good person and lead by example with your students.
Yeah. And, of course we all, we're definitely want as many people that we're pushing through these programs to stick in our industry. But at the end of the day, from an educator standpoint, I'm sure that you're happy with whatever career path your students choose, as long as they're going after it and they're getting it and they're being, the best version of themselves as they can with whatever career path they choose in the future.
Yeah. I had one student that, he went through the program, went through the motions, and he kind of found out that, this welding gig, it's not for me. And although I wish he would have stuck with the welding industry, he got into selling automobile and home insurance, and he's like damn good at it, and he's really passionate about it. And guess what? I just got I just switched to State Farm, where he's working at, because he's passionate about what he's doing. And well, he got me a great deal too. But but at the end of the day, not everybody that goes through a welding program is going to be a welder, and that's okay because you're finding out what fits and what doesn't. And for the people that, maybe they can't get that hand-eye coordination, they can't get that, the manipulation, and they just can't focus on it. For some reason, they're not able to get it. They can't get their hands to do what it's supposed to do, or they just don't understand, how to work with their hands that well. That's fine. They can get into, equipment repair. They can get into being a technician. They can get into engineering. There's, you've seen the Lincoln Electric career tree for welding. There's so many different aspects and so many different branches you can get into that's still related to welding. And if you have that fundamental understanding of how everything works, it's going to make life easier when you pursue one of those careers.
You hit the nail on the head there. There's so much more than just being under the hood, and I had done a project with Monica Farr from the AWS Foundation. And, part of what I did was, I want veterans to know there's a place in our industry for them. Coming from a veteran background, the reason I got hired is because I went to a veteran hiring fair. Like that's how I got into the industry. And, there's tons of other industry at that fair too, but I just happened to land in welding, and, I'm glad I did. But there's a lot of other things that, that I wanted to really highlight, in that video I did. And that was that you're not going to be stuck under the hood forever. You may be a supervisor You can go down the CWI route. Maybe you get into being a robotics technician. Maybe you get into management. My career path is, not for everybody. Not everyone wants to get into sales and, really go out there and promote and, kind of show people better ways to do things. And that's what I do in the industry is I'm looking for what kind of value can I do in the industry and, how our products fit into that particular segment.
Right. Well, let's go ahead and get into plasma cutting because that's the premise of the episode. It's something that I teach, but I don't know plasma to the equivalent that I know welding. There's just so much more to plasma. So let's go ahead and kick it off and talk about the fourth state of matter.
Yeah, so that's one of the textbook things right out the bat, right? So in school you typically learn, solids, liquids, gases. Plasma is that fourth state. And, one of the typical things that comes up is how hot is a plasma arc? And you can see a lot of information out there. People will say 20,000, degrees Fahrenheit up to 40,000. At the end of the day, what you really need to know is it's really hot.
Yeah.
It's really hot, and that's what we're cutting with. So a little bit about how plasma works. So plasma, what we're essentially doing is, if you look at natural forms of plasma in the environment, one of the ones that stands out is a lightning bolt. And this is a really elementary way of looking at it, but it makes a lot of sense, and I tell everybody, how many lightning bolts have you ever seen two that look the same? And the answer is no. So how do we control that plasma state? And what we actually do is we surround that arc with a vortex of air that's actually part of the arc as well. And I tell everybody it's a lightning bolt wrapped up in a tornado. And it's a simple way of looking at it, but at the end of the day, you really have to think about, okay, it is simple, but it's also not simple at the same time. So there's a couple things that we can't control. We can't control what you put into that tornado. So one of the things that we always recommend people do is you got to have clean, dry air. And what does that mean? It means paint quality air. That's what it means. So if you have bottled air, dry compressed air, that's perfect. You don't have to do anything to it. But if you're running off of an air compressor, you're going to have to filter down that air to get the most out of the plasma process. And it's lucrative for you as well to do this because your consumable life is going to last longer and your process is going to be more stable. One of the things that I think is really exciting about plasma is it truly is, it's an engineered process. You talk about welding, there's so many variables that you're controlling as the operator. When we talk about plasma, it is truly an engineered process and you don't see sometimes the engineering that goes into it, but everything matters, the swirl strength, where that swirl starts at, how it surrounds the electrode, how it squeezes through the nozzle, and then how it vents out the back and the shield as well. So there's a lot of things, and that goes into the engineering side of plasma. And that's why I would tell everybody, since it is such an engineered process, if you've had a bad taste with plasma, maybe you should try a different manufacturer, and I would, of course, recommend that you try Hypertherm plasma. And in most cases, everyone's very, very happy with what Hypertherm has to offer when it comes to plasma cutting.
Mm-hmm. So it's really cool that you kind of explained it as a tornado or a lightning bolt inside of a tornado, because it does have a twist in there. That's why you have the swirl ring. So, I mean, it's forcing that into a direction to maintain that steady arc. So which, now correct me if I'm wrong, it's spinning in a clockwise formation?
Yeah, so that's actually it's true and not true at the same time. So there's actually clockwise swirl rings and counterclockwise. So the reason that you would do that is if you were making like a really large panel and you need it to be book matched like properly, there's a good side and there's a bad side of the cut, and that comes down to the swirl direction. So in general, it's a clockwise direction, and a good rule of thumb, if you're cutting, is you make an L with your left hand, and your index finger is going to be your direction of travel, where your thumb is going to be the good side of the cut.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, because I know, like, when you're cutting out a circle, whether it's a male or a female part, you want to cut a different direction so you get the best edge quality on the piece that you're going to keep.
That's correct. And that's where, getting into the software side of things like really helps out. So The good thing with, having like a dedicated like nesting software, for instance, Hypertherm has ProNest, it's going to take and it's going to apply the best cutting techniques, whether it's the technique that you use for your lead in, lead out, where that lead in, lead out's at, and it's going to make sure that you're always getting the good side of your cut for your finished piece.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a quick commercial break. This segment of the Arc Junkies podcast is brought to you by AHP Welders. AHP makes great machines for under $1,000. These machines are ideal for students, home hobbyists, tinkers, and makers. You also get great performance and reliability for less money. Head on over to ahpwelds.com and see what they have for you. We're also brought to you by Strong Hand Tools. Whether you're looking for a solid fabrication table, toggle clamps, material holds, bottle carriers, or other items to make your shop and fabrication life easier, faster, safer, and more accurate. Go check them out today at stronghandtools.com/ArcJunkies and view their full line of products. Let's go ahead and get back into the show. Okay, so that's all incorporated into the software to it. It knows whether you have, you're going to tell it the cut profile, whether it's male or female, and it's going to know whether, okay, this one's, I'm going to cut counterclockwise or I'm going to cut this one clockwise to make sure that it's got the best edge. And, because there's like a conical shape to the edge of plasma because it comes out like a bulb. Unless you start getting into high def plasma cutting and everything like that. But you're paying like $1 an amp for some of that or $3 an amp. I can't remember what the conversion is, but it's like, it's a lot more expensive than your average homeowner is going to go out and buy. But yeah, that's pretty neat that it compensates for the different directions so you can maintain the best cut quality.
Yeah, absolutely. And, talking like quick plug on software real quick. This came up in the educators workshop and, me being a resource there, we actually have a lot of information that's out there for educators around the CAD CAM side of the of our business. So you can actually get, as an educator, you get a full blown ProNest and you don't pay a dime for it. I believe you get like 30 seats for your school as well, where they can access that software. And, it's a great resource. I hear all the time on your podcast, like, here's the resources to use, whether it's, how to put this, digital resource as a PDF on your phone to reference back at. And one of the things that you get with our software is you get access to the CAD CAM knowledge base. Just this morning, I was out at BAMF and they're working with ProNest and, we're getting them squared away and showing them the CAD CAM resource center. Or it's the knowledge base is what we call it. And, if you're using Windows, because you have to use Windows to run ProNest, you're going to get access to not only a 2D design software that has a plugin over to our ProNest, you're going to get ProNest, and then that database has tutorial videos. And I actually did, and I dub it myself, the ProNest Challenge, where I wanted to learn the software a little bit more inside and out. And it's typically something that, people in other roles at Hypertherm would know the software a little bit more in depth than that. And you have to find an excuse to fail. They do such a good job with these videos, and the experience of working with that team is very fluid. One thing I want to plug real quick is, I actually talked with the software sales team, and, if you're actually to reach out to the team via the email address or their telephone number, they're actually going to, give a 21-day trial to everybody who's listening in. So if you just call in and just say Arc Junkies and Jake Ross sent you to 716-434-3755, they're going to extend a trial out for 21 days for all of our nesting software for your listeners.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So does that integrate into most plasma cutting systems?
Yeah, so the nesting software is off the table, and we should talk about that process really, really brief. Like, how do I go from design to a cut part? So, if you're designing in 3D software, you can push those parts out to 2D format. Get the DXF file, and then once you have the design portion finished, you would transfer that over to like a nesting software. So if you're going to make a table and you got to make some like table legs and some gussets, and like today I saw a drip pan being made. You can design everything. You can then take the individual components, put it in the nesting software, and tell it the size of sheet that you're going to use. It's going to apply the cutting know-how, and then it's going to output that as a .cnc file. And, typically we're working with those that are using our plasma with that. In this particular instance, it was a Hypertherm controller, but you can definitely work with other controllers as well.
Oh, cool. That's pretty neat. You guys also do the Hypertherm curriculum, which is something I've been interested in for a while. You have I just recently seen this because I applied for the Spark Something Great campaign to get a plasma cutter and the curriculum and everything for our school. We weren't selected this year, so I'm going to reapply again next year. But there's a whole curriculum to teach plasma cutting. And then you also have like visual aids you can pass around. Like here's the nozzle, here's the swirl ring, here's the electrode and all that other stuff.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that I want to leave everybody with. You're not alone in learning this stuff. We have great resources for educators and everybody out there. And one of the things, and it's really easy to get at the website, is going to plasmaeducation.com. It's a redirect link, but it's going to bring you to where you can get the educator's curriculum. It points you to resources where you can maybe find grants. You talked about the Spark Something Great grant. So, if anybody wants to get onto that, we do that yearly. And typically we start taking entries towards the end of January, beginning of February. And if you want to receive an email to get on a list for that, so you'll get a reminder, just email, information at hypertherm.com. Let them know that you're an educator, give them your credentials and what school you teach for, and they'll get you on that list. So you'll get notified when that opportunity comes up again in the future.
Okay. Yeah. I think I signed up on the website a while back because we have a PowerMax 105 at the school that we use quite a bit on our Torchmate table. And it's been a great running machine so far. I mean, and then I like the fine cut consumables because we do a lot of like 1/8 inch sheet metal, so we can handle it because we do like a lot of signs and custom like benches and stuff like that. So 1/8 inch is usually the best because it's cheaper and it's a little bit lighter, it's more manageable, easier to clean up and everything. And then when you form it and weld it together, it's still pretty solid for everything that we're doing with it, because it doesn't have to be anything structural. But I know it's capable of cutting up to like, I think 1 inch thick material on the 105.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. So you threw a machine out there, and, I think it'd be kind of good to talk a little bit about how do you select the right plasma for the job that you're going to be doing. One of the things you got to know is what material are you going to be cutting, and how thick are you going to be cutting? And then the other major question is what kind of power limitation do you have? So that PowerMax 105 you have, I know there's people that got 3-phase in the garages. I'm not one of them.
Yeah, I'm not.
But that would be a no-go for a lot of places. But, like PowerMax 85, you can go single phase or 3-phase, 200 or 600 volts. So it's a really wide, voltage range. And you're typically looking at a few things, how much you want to cut, but especially with tables, you're really thinking about what do you want to pierce. So that pierce rating is so important. So, like a 125 will pierce 1 inch, your 105 will pierce 7/8.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't put anything that big on there yet, but I thought it would go up to at least 1 inch. But yeah, so 7/8. That's still that's pretty thick. So you could get pretty good cut quality with like a 3/4 inch plate.
Yeah, and another thing is, it is an engineered process. I talked about that a little bit earlier. Each amperage range is going to have a different level of cut quality for the thickness that you're running. So, typically the amperage ranges for our processes are like 45, 65, 85, 105, and then up to 125. But fine cut, like you talked about fine cut, that's a 45 amp and below process.
So, what's the best way to select the appropriate, because if you're not using the right cutting tips and nozzles and all that stuff for the application, you're not going to get the best cut quality. So is there like a rule of thumb or like a resource or something you can go to find out, okay, like, for this thick material, I'm going to need a 65 amp, but if I step up to here, I need an 85 amp. And then you match the amperage on the machine to the consumables. So a lot of people are under the impression that, I can run a 45 amps on my machine and just run this 85 amp consumable because it's rated for up to 85 amps, but that's not necessarily going to give you the best cut quality.
Yeah, so a good rule of thumb, and there's a little bit more to it, but a good rule of thumb is to kind of run For PowerMax consumables specifically, run the amperage process where it's kind of towards the thicker range of material. So like 45 up to a quarter, 65 up to a half inch. And yeah, it's going to be a little bit slower, but we just did this test up at Ryan's shop actually. And when you run the 45 amp versus the 85 amp, and you do a side by side and you look at the angularity, I cut 2 squares of each amperage process and then I butt them up to get against each other, and you'll see the difference in the gap. So, and we were running quarter-inch material for that test, and that's where you see the visual effect. There's definitely angularity with plasma, and the more fit and finish you can get off the table is less fit and finish you have to do off the table, right?
Yeah, a lot less grinding to do later on, trying to square things up. So as you're going through, I mean, like, how do you figure out like your cut speeds and all that stuff as well? So like pierce time, dwell time, and then cut speeds.
So everything like that comes straight out of the operator's manual. So you're going to know right off the bat, you're going to know what your pierce height should be, what your initial cut height should be. You're going to know your pierce delay time. You're going to know your travel speed. In many cases, there's a production setting and a best quality setting as well. And everything's right out of the operator's manual for that. The other thing that's really important there is the kerf, or the width of the material that you're removing as you're cutting. That's all included in the cut chart.
Okay. So let's talk manual for a little bit, because we talked automated like on a CNC plasma cutter, but for a lot of the tasks that you're doing where it's handheld, like the gouging, that was one of the things we did over at weld.com. That was the first time I'd ever gouged with a plasma cutter. Like, I've always used carbon arc cutting, but hey, it's 2021, we can start switching things up and incorporating new technology into some of our metal prep processes. So let's talk gouging for a minute. What's different about plasma gouging than plasma cutting?
Yeah, so what's really unique about plasma arc gouging is we have a couple things. The first one is going to be the reduction in noise. So it makes less noise in comparison with like a carbon arc gouging process. The other side is the metallurgical benefits, where you're not actually picking up additional material or adding carbon into your actual gouge. So when you add that carbon in, you have to grind it out. So you don't necessarily have to do that with the plasma arc gouging process. And then what's unique about Hypertherm is we actually have 3 specific gouging processes. So we have what's called max removal. So it's a much more aggressive removal. We have max control, which is a lot closer to like a carbon arc gouging rod. And then if you go down into the finer gouging processes, we have precision gouging. So precision gouging would be really awesome for artwork. And you can actually go as far as to removing like a spot weld on like an automotive panel, for instance.
Really? So it doesn't have that, it's not as aggressive. It doesn't have that real deep dig into it.
That's correct. And it runs at a lot lower amperages. And, that's another, flexibility advantage to a plasma gouge is you can, if you want to, not have as much dig into the base material, you can just turn the amperage down. And you get a lot of control with not only your torch angle, but your tip to work distance with the tip as well.
Okay. Now I want to talk about flush cut too, because that's something I always thought you could only do with like what they call a scarfing tip or a weld washer with oxy fuel cutting. But you can now do flush cuts with CNC plasma, or I'm sorry, with just like handheld plasma.
Yeah, absolutely. So flush cut is a very unique process. So we're bending the arc at a 45-degree angle, and then we also have a drag shield on the bottom that's chamfered at a 45. So imagine that you're cutting out like a lifting eye. You're shooting the plasma arc out parallel to the base material. And the advantage to that is I'm not damaging the base material. I mean, with running the scarfing tips even, it's pretty easy to damage the base material. Oh, yeah. And you're left with, around 3/16 of an inch that you would grind down. But the other thing is after you do that initial cut, what you do is you just tilt the torch up a little bit and you can do a plasma washing process. Okay. And you can get it very, very close without damaging the base material. So, that comes down to, grinding less. Everybody wants to grind less, abrasives cost as well.
No, that's pretty slick. You could probably set that up with like a buggo system and take the backing strips off of weld test plates and stuff.
Yeah, so you could definitely do that. Another thing about it, we just talked about lifting eye removal. Because I cut so much closer, if I design my lifting eye so I have a little bit more real estate, I can reuse that lifting eye again and again and again. So I'm getting a lot more utilization out of that lifting eye that I have to remove after use.
Okay. So what are some of the new innovations that you guys are coming up with? Because Hypertherm's always coming out with the newest, latest, and greatest stuff when it comes to plasma cutting.
Yeah, when we talk about innovations, we don't have a new product on the market today, but when we look at the trend, and this is what I would say is kind of look at the trend of what's been going on with Hypertherm plasma over the decades. Each generation that's came out has become easier to use, more cost effective, and have a better ROI for your business. And how does that work? We're trying to provide value to the operator in the process as well as the business. So, one example of that is, with our Duramax line, we color coded all the consumables. So, purple, red, yellow, green, exactly which machine you're going to be using those consumables with.
Okay. And are they color coded for amperage rating as well?
So they're not color coded for amperage rating. It'd be more like process or which machine. So for instance, we have a PowerMax 30 Air. You're going to use the green packaged consumables for that. The 30 XP would be your yellow. Your Duramax is going to be anything from the 45 XP all the way up to the PowerMax 105. And then you also have the PowerMax 125, which is going to be your purple. So if you have multiple cutting machines for different applications in your facility, you're going to be able to segregate that out from an inventory management standpoint.
What was that first one you mentioned? You mentioned something like a 325 Air or something?
So the 30 Air, so PowerMax 30 Air. So that is a plasma cutting machine with a built-in air compressor that goes up to 30 amps. So again, we always ask, what kind of power are we looking at? Well, that's 110 to 240, and you get a different range of power based on which voltage you're using. But that's a really handy machine if you don't have an air compressor in your garage or your shop, and it's very portable. So it's really lucrative for people that are doing a lot of field HVAC work because it's plug and play. You're doing really thin gauge material, and it's going to rip through it no problem.
Like what kind of thicknesses is that capable of?
So again, that's going to depend on the power rating. I typically would run that machine up to 1/4 inch. It will, what we call severance, up to 5/8 of an inch.
Really?
So severance is going to be a slower cut, and it's going to require a little bit more cleanup than, we'll say, a recommended rating.
Okay. What kind of weight we looking on this thing? Like if I got to lug it around the job site or tote it around, but I mean, obviously it's got its own air compressor built into it.
Well, I don't have every spec memorized, but I mean, you're going to be right around 30 pounds. I would say probably below that. And the torch is fully integrated in there, so it's hard mounted on that system.
Okay. No, I could see that'd be beneficial because I do like a lot of field work, or not as much as I used to, but like on-site stuff. And everything gets cut with a cutoff wheel just because I don't have to tote, bottles and tanks and air compressors and all that stuff around me for that exact reason. So it's usually sawzalls and cutoff wheels and all that stuff. And it's not always the best tool for the job, but it's the most convenient and most cost effective.
Well, and you're hitting on a really important point. What is the best tool for the job, and that's where you got to think about where does plasma provide value to me. If you don't have a generator and you're out in the middle of a field, it's going to be a little hard to hook up a plasma because you have no power. So you're going to be, toting around a couple gas bottles to make those cuts.
Yeah. And let's touch on that really quick because we talked about earlier about, it's you guys, Hypertherm, or the manufacturer, the plasma manufacturer, can't control what's going into the center of the tornado. So now if I want to run off, what's the best compressed gas to use? Like 100% oxygen, I would imagine. Like if I didn't have access to an air compressor.
The general gas that you'd use is just compressed air. And there's other gases that you can use, but you'd use them for more application specific. So both aluminum and stainless, you could run nitrogen, or you could run, what's called F5, or some gas distributors would call it H5, and that's a mix of 95% nitrogen and 5% hydrogen. And specifically with stainless, it actually, because of the hydrogen, it helps clean the edge, so you don't have as much of an oxide layer.
Yeah, I've noticed that, because when we did the grill for Sam the cooking guy, and we had to cut the grills out for weld.com on the face, we had to put Sam's logo, which is his face, in the middle of these grates, and then cut it out to where you still have, it's like a grill grate. And that's what we ended up using, was that H5. So it was with the hydrogen mix. And I was like, man, I'd never used it before. I was like, man, I don't know about putting hydrogen near an open flame or even electrical arc or anything. But I guess because, it's a small percentage of it.
Well, and it's great to use something when there's a value associated with it, and F5 is a great example, or H5, however you look at it, is a great example of that, because you're reducing a lot of the post-cut rework.
Yeah, because
if you cut with compressed air and you're going to weld that surface, you're going to have to grind it off that oxide layer. If it's something that's not going to get welded and you're fine with the cosmetics, you may not have to do that. And gases play a huge role in the industry. You talked a little bit about adding a little hydrogen in, and hey, maybe that's not so safe. You can actually do that with TIG welding too. Mm-hmm. 2% hydrogen with the balanced argon, and you would be shocked with some of the results that you can get with that mixture of gas.
Yeah, I was surprised, because we cut the first one out with like regular compressed air, and obviously, anytime you're dealing with plasma cutting, you want to use good clean air, so you need to have a dryer hooked up to it, either at the air compressor prior to going into the plasma cutter or right before the plasma cutter, because it causes you get moisture in there. And once you get moisture in there, you just start decimating all your consumables that you put in there. So you can be replacing your consumables a lot more often and getting crappy cut quality. But I did notice that when we use compressed air and cut the stainless steel parts out, we were like, man, that's going to be a lot of cleanup, because we did some test runs and everything to make sure we had the cut profile and everything right. So that's when we switched over to that F5 gas, cut it a lot better. We just flipped it over, hit it with a wire wheel, hit it with a flapper wheel, and then it was done. I mean, it wasn't like a big cleanup, but had we done it, with regular compressed air, there was a lot more cleanup. The edge quality just wasn't there, and there was a lot of tight little spots that you'd literally have to sit there and grind out with like a deburring disc, or a deburring a burr bit, essentially, to get up into the little nooks and crannies to make it all look clean. But that changing that gas mixture allowed us to get much better cut quality.
Yeah, absolutely. Air quality is so huge. And just to touch base on that subject one more time, you talked about having an air dryer, and that's awesome. A lot of companies have, air dryers at the compressor. And, the reality, especially in these summer humid months that we're in, there's a lot of condensation and buildup that happens from the air compressor back to the machine. So at Hypertherm, we recommend at least having that last line of defense with an air filter on the back. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that you can do to really, protect your investment is, what are you doing with metal when you're cutting it? You're cutting it, it's going to drop. You really don't want to drop metal on top of like your torch lead. So I'd always recommend putting a cover on the torch as well.
Yeah. Yeah, especially like I do the same thing with like all of our TIG leads and everything. They've got special, covers on them and stuff like that. Same thing with our push-pull guns and, our spool guns and everything. They've got covers on there to, just for that simple reason alone, is sparks and spatter and hot metal and all that stuff. Stuff falls on it, protect your investment. Well, cool, man. Jake, it's been great having you on, talking about some of this stuff, kind of getting a little bit more of an in-depth look at the plasma cutting. Go ahead and plug some of those resources one more time for the folks that missed it, and then I'll go ahead and drop it in the show notes as well. I know that not every app that people listen to the podcast on has that details section in there, so if you can plug that one more time.
Yeah, so a great resource for plasma education is plasmaeducation.com. That's going to push you over to another site on ours where you'll have all the resources, whether you're looking up, grants, whether you're looking for the educator's curriculum. And that's also where the Spark Something grant would be when that's available. I would definitely recommend emailing information at hypertherm.com and that would allow you to get put on the list for when that grant becomes available again. And on the plasma, or on the CAM Solutions side of things, where we have our nesting software, you can call into their service 716-434-3755, or you can reach them at CAMNA sales@hypertherm.com, and they'll do a 21-day trial on any of the nesting software that you'd like to try out.
Great, man. I appreciate you sharing the resources with everybody. I'm sure a lot of people will take advantage of that and check out that software and check into some of the educational benefits that Hypertherm has to offer.
Yeah, and hey, thanks for having me on, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And if you never need someone that has any plasma questions, you can feel free to direct them my way, because I know you got my information. So.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming out. All right, real quick, Jake reached out to me after the show with some great news. Hypertherm has decided to give everybody 30 additional days to their normal free trial of their ProNest software. All you have to do is head on over to www.hypertherm.com/ProNest-IT and select any subscription plan and use ARC Junkies in the coupon box at checkout, and you'll get a 37-day subscription to ProNest absolutely free. This offer is good up until October 1st. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is all I have for you today. Don't forget to check out all the great ARC Junkies merchandise over at arcjunkies.com and click on the merch tab. Stay safe out there, and until next time, make every weld better than your last.